The truth is that one of the challenges that we face, as Yankov Kamenetsky used to say, it's not that the American Rabbanim are smaller than the European Rabbanim, but they have more challenging and intimidating questions. Our Zaydas knew Malacha was very defined. You do something. You make Beira, you make Bishul, you make Teichen. And at times, in a great degree, thanks to technology, we have a new phenomenon that Malacha sort of happens by itself. Now, when we were children and something happened, we say it happened by itself, but we knew and our parents knew that nothing happens by itself. You broke something, it didn't happen by itself, but it's a good excuse. But today, indeed, that is a reality in many different forms. A person's walking in the street and suddenly he puts a light on. He's sitting in Beis Medrash learning and he's on a screen, he's being videoed. Rabbi Gaza mentioned about what Rabbi Yashiv Sak, that satellite, the person's walking in the street and he's Kulei Shabbos and he's being recorded what he's doing, his actions. And the question is, how does halacha respond to such a new metzias, a new concept? We would like to say, tzaddik ma pa'al, quoting a pasuk, what did I do? I'm doing nothing. I'm just walking in the street. I put a light on. That's not me. So how do we define Hilchos Shabbos accurately and to apply it in the myriad of questions that technology has presented us in this Dar Achron? I know, you went through the sugya and I feel inhibited. I feel somewhat like talking to Einstein about the theory of relativity because you are so familiar with the sugya, but I think there is certainly parts that we could still touch upon that I think we'll find intriguing. A person that washing his hands, Netilas Yadayim on Sukkos, Yom Tov or Shabbos, in his backyard, and he washes it over grass. So I'm sure you know that. That's the Shulchan Aruch and Shin Amud Vav Sid Gimel. That's considered Psik Reisha. No less than 10 Gemaras that say Psik Reisha is awesome. But the key word, as Rashi says, Kimechaven Chashiv Lei, which means if you know something is inevitable, something is intrinsic to the malacha. Because when you wash water over grass, you're watering the grass. Although you don't care about the grass, that is Psik Reisha. The key word in Psik Reisha, to reduce it into one word, is malacha. Ma'aseh malacha, if you like two words. Watering the grass is a ma'aseh malacha. You can't live in denial. You want to wash your hands and not water the grass. That possibility does not exist. There's no such thing. So we could really define Psik Reisha as ma'aseh malacha, machaven. In Lamdish, select in the ma'aseh. You're washing over grass, that is watering the grass. That's inseparable. Then you have a totally different scenario. A person wants extra steam in his house, and it's Shabbos, you can't put on the steam. You can't even raise the temperature. So he opens the window with the intention of the cold air rushing in, and that will eventually, and that we italicize that word, eventually will put on the steam. Now, you can't say that's a Ma'aseh Issa, because opening a window is not a Ma'aseh Issa, and it's not happening right away. But that is the concept that we're familiar, and you certainly are, in Shabbos Kuf Chaf of Grama. You're doing something with the intention. Your kavana is to cause a reaction. You want the window to stimulate the steam and put the steam on. So if I have to reduce the two concepts into just one or two words, Psik Reisha is ma'aseh malacha. It's inseparable. The classic example, believe it or not, of Psik Reisha is children are restless and the parents want to give the child a toy to play with, so they cut off Psik Reisha, they cut a chicken's head. Now, I always found this puzzling. They had very interesting children in those days that they would play with a severed chicken head. Today, even adults run from the sight of a severed chicken head, but that's what Psik Reisha is all about. It's the Ma'aseh Issa. You can't just be oblivious of the fact. So Psik Reisha is Ma'aseh, and Grama is Kavana. It's not a Maisa Issa. If I get Leisasika Malacha, Asiyu Da'asa, Gram is Mutter Midaraisa. But it's the Gavana that's the problem. Another example of a Psik Reisha is found in Shabbos Kuf Zayin. Someone comes home Friday night to a very pleasant surprise. There's a deer in his room. No, he might have venison for supper Sunday night. Could he close the door and thereby trap the deer? So that's a Psik Reisha. Closing the door inevitably will trap the deer. So there you have another example that's the Maisa Issa, closing a door in a small area and a deer is no longer free, it's confined. That's the Issa of Seder. What's noteworthy, the Rashba on the end of that period of Kuf Zayin, he seems to have an incredible leniency. And he says, really, if your kavana is because it's winter and you want to keep the house warm, you're not thinking about the deer. You're indeed allowed to close the door, although inevitably the deer is trapped. Frekti Ran, on that Gemara, Dvarav Tmuan Be'enai Harbe. This is mystifying. How could the Rashba permit a simple Psik Reisha? You're closing the door and you're trapping the deer. The Magen Avram, of course, passing like the Ran and rejects the leniency of this Rashba. But I need not tell you the Rashba was the Rashba. What did the Rashba hold? So we come to another nugget, another brekulater, Pam would refer to it, that really complements the sugya from a different angle. It really supplements the sugya. Imagine someone has plants and he enjoys the growth of the plants, and Shabbos he would like to help the plants grow a little better. So he opens the window shade, opens the window, allows the sunshine to come in and thereby benefit the growth of the plants. If you remember Rashi Mezaisa Bracha, sunlight is beneficial to plants. So it should be that would be a malacha, a form of zereya. He's not watering it, but he's benefiting the growth of the plants. How about you open the shade at night, when there's no sunshine, obviously, but you're hoping that tomorrow it will be sunny, and tomorrow the sunshine will benefit your plants. Now that's not a Psik Reisha, because Friday night when there's no sun, there's no malacha. But that is a grama. You're doing something beheta. Opening a shade is heta. But your kavana is certainly to promote the growth tomorrow. That's a typical grama, a delayed reaction, and that's an Issa D'Rabbanan. Now for the final scenario, let's say at night, you want fresh air. You're not thinking of the plants. You do the same action, you open the shades, open the windows if you want, and the sunshine comes in. Not at night, because at night there's no sun. Tomorrow morning, the sunshine comes in and helps the plants. Is that awesome? You did the same opening of the shade. It seems certainly challenging, but it's not. Think about it. There's nothing to prohibit in this action. Let's look at our checklist. Psik Reisha is a Maisa Issa. Opening a shade Friday night is not a Maisa Issa at all. There's no sun. There's no Maisa Issa whatsoever. Is this a grama? Also not. Grama, the key word in grama is kavana. You do something now to promote a malacha later. The case of the Gemara Shabbos, the Mishnah Shabbos, you put a barrel of water in the path at a distance from the fire, and the fire bursts the barrel and puts out the water. Your kavana is to put out the fire. Here, your kavana is you want cool air, not to benefit the plant. Chazal did not create an Issa from a non-Issa. Chazal identified the Issa. When a person does a Psik Reisha, there's a Maisa Issa. When a person is mechaven for a subsequent malacha, for a delayed reaction, that is identifiable as a grama. But this case is what the Avnei Nezer and the Tshuva, the Chalkei Yaakov also discusses this. This has both chisroinus, what we'll call a Psik Reisha begrama. although that's somewhat a misnomer because it's not a psik ratio or a grama, but it seems to both have both qualities or both chisroinus. Because there is no Maisa Issa, you're not mechaber for any Maisa Issa. So what's the Issa? Chazal didn't create an Issa out of a non-Issa. If you tell me you open the shade at night so tomorrow it will benefit the plant, that's a grama. If you open the shade now when it's sunny, that's psik. And even if you don't care about it, so we'll label the psik le'nichale. But this case, there's no Maisa Issa. Friday night, there's no Maisa Issa. There's no kavana. That is a psik begrama, and that is mutter. But what's beautiful about it, they both say this is the explanation of the otherwise mysterious Rashba. The Rashba says you're allowed to close the door when you come home and there's a deer running around your dining room, as long as you're mechaven to keep the house warm, to keep out the cold, and you're not mechaven to trap. What happened to psik? So says the Abinez and the Chelkas Yoyev, the Rashba goes with the Shita of the Rosh and Bava Kama, the 8th parak, Siman Gimel, that says that the only tzeda d'araisa is when you physically grab something. You grab a deer, you grab an animal, when you have it in your hands. That's tzeda d'araisa. But if you lock something into a room, albeit you limited its freedom, you confined it, it cannot escape, but that is not a Maisa Tzeda, because you don't have it yet. So, as the Rosh says, when you lock something into a room, that's not a Tzeda D'Oraisa, that's a Grama. Now it's Masik Midvash. Because the Rashba held like that premise of the Rosh. So you come home Friday night and you close the door because you wouldn't mind having venison on Sunday, and that's your kavana, although it's a grama, but grama on Shabbos is us. But in this case, that undoubtedly his kavana is solely to keep the house warm and not to trap the deer. That would be a new expression of sikreisha begrama. Again, he didn't do a ma'isa issa because trapping, closing a door is not a ma'isa issa, it's a grama. And he's not mechaven for that. So you're lacking both prerequisites of issa. You don't have a ma'isa issa, you don't have a kavana, and that's why the Rashba felt that that action would be permissible. So now that we have this, I guess, sort of this combination of sikreisha begrama, let us apply it to the numerous questions that technology has presented us with, and hopefully we'll see Agia Kapecha Kisaychel, what you learned till this time will certainly give us the guidance to be able to identify what's mutter and what's asa. We'll start with a seemingly simple question: adding cold water to an urn on Yom Tov. Now, of course, adding cold water to an urn on Shabbos is a malacha bishul, but on Yom Tov, bishul is mutter. So what could be wrong with filling up the urn Erev Shabbos, which is Yom Tov, so you'll have a Shabbos, or filling up on Yom Tov for Yom Tov? It seems to be a question of bishul, and bishul on Yom Tov is mutter. So people identify the problem, but when you put in a sudden gush of cold water, the light either goes on or off, depending on the model. It's no longer in a serve mode. Now it's cold. So either the light that indicates it's ready will go off, or the boil light will go on. But by pouring a lot of cold water into an urn on Yom Tov, you're putting on that little light. The truth is that problem is a minor problem, because that light presumably is not a real light, that's an LED, or as technology progresses, it's less of a shaila b'chlal. It's not a filament, it's not an incandescent bulb. Naturally, it's very far from that. So you're putting on an LED light, which you could discuss what is the severity of that issa. But the real problem is that when you put in a sudden gush, a large quantity of cold water into an urn, that is inevitable that you're putting on the heating element. Because let's not forget, the water is set, if you have a good urn, 180, 190 degrees. Now you're putting in cold water, which is probably, it's not room temperature, probably even less than that. It's probably 50, 60 degrees. So you're putting in a sudden gush of cold water into a urn, that inevitably will put on the heating element. So it's just like plugging in an urn on Yom Tiv. So that is the problem of psikration. And even if it doesn't happen right away, but obviously the kavana is that the water should be boiled. So therefore on Yom Tiv, there's a problem with adding cold water to an urn. The solution would be if you boil water on the fire, if you have a fire on the gas range, and then add it, or else wait until the heating element is on. Now, how do you know? Either you know or you don't, but if you know the heating element is on, so then it can't aggravate the situation if you add more cold water, because you're not putting on the heating element. The worst scenario is you're cooking the new water that you're adding. No, Yom Tov, you're allowed to cook. So that would be the solution to the urn on Yom Tov. People that go to hotels and unfortunately do not know the Metzias, the first time you learn your lesson, but many hotels are fully automatic. You open the door, the light of the hotel room, the light goes on. If it's climate control, you put on the steam during the winter, you put on the action during the summer. When you walk into the room, that is a serious problem of psikration. In fact, this question was discussed over 100 years ago by the Beis Yitzchak, the HaRav, who writes that he heard in the Vienna, as he described, because they were the trailblazers in modern technology, quote unquote. But he says they have a room, you walk into it in Vienna, you put a light on, you walk out, the light goes off. So the Beis Yitzchak rules emphatically that that's Havara Deraisa, because you're putting on a light on Shabbos. What could be the heter? Now, the only point that we have to sort of modify this psak is, why don't we identify your action as a grama? I didn't put a light switch on. I opened the door to my hotel room. Maybe we could reduce that to sort of mitigate the issa and consider it a grama, which is a rabbanan. Okay, the rabbanan is still chaviv ma'oid, but at least you're not doing a deraisa. But that is incorrect, and it's an important factor. Because the Achiezer has a classic tshuva, a fascinating tshuva in Chayil Gimel Siman Samach, where he says that putting on a light, he's talking about a real incandescent bulb, is not a grama. It's a ma'isa b'yadayim, because that is its switch. It's not that you're doing something that's causing something else to happen. It's actually activating the electricity. And it's a fascinating tshuva because he quotes from a Gadol Echad that identified electricity as a malacha d'Rabbanan, and therefore in certain instances permitted electricity on Yom Tiv. Now that individual was the Aruch HaShulchan, and it's noteworthy that he prefaces his words that I don't know the Metzias, I wasn't told clearly the Metzias, but the way I understand it could be the electricity on Yom Tiv is d'Rabbanan, and in certain instances the Yom Tiv gram is mutter. But the Chaim Oizer says it's not true, and he marshals a Gemara in Sanhedrin, where Gemara says if someone is sleeping peacefully, and right by where he's sleeping there's a wall, there's a dam that's holding back a tremendous gush of water. You remove the wall, and the water comes out with a great energy and kills the person on contact. That's the malacha of Ritzicha, the Issa of Ritzicha. Why isn't that grama? There it's pashit. You released an existing force, a koyach, that's attributable to you. Just like a person shoots an arrow, he's held accountable, even though he didn't do anything, the arrow did it, but he harnessed that force, he created that force. So too, with a bitka damaya, you are actually like shooting the water, not with a bow and arrow, but rather with the release of the wall, and that's considered ritzicha. The Chaim Oizer explains very carefully that when you put a light on, at least in those days, you lifted up the wall that detached the current. Actually, he says you're actually connecting the current, so that's a ma'isa b'yadayim. But I think what's important is what Chaim Oizer felt, and he's 100, of course, he doesn't need my askama, but he's 100% right, that electricity is, at least the mechanics of it, is a malacha d'oraisa. You're actually doing b'yadayim, you're connecting, creating that appliance. In fact, in the Hakdama to the Sefer, the Askama, I should say, of Rab Issa Zalman Meltzer to the Chuvas Chelkus Yaakov. He writes to the author, the Chelkus Yaakov, you write a lot of electricity. I was makabel from B'chaim Moiza not to discuss electricity because it's a malacha deraisa and you don't need any discussion about it. That's how convinced Rav Chaim Moiza was. But the truth is, with a switch, it's even more simple. Because there are certain malachas that by nature seem to be grama. Primarily, zoira, not seireya, with an ayin, zoira, zayin, vav, reishei, winnowing. You have the tfua after it was stomped on. You want to separate the shaft from the eichel. You throw it up in the air, and the shaft is blown away, and the food falls down. That seems to be a grama. I'm not doing anything. I'm just putting it in the motion that the air will separate it. So that's a good question, and that's the Gemara in Bava Kama Daf Samach. And as the Rosh explains on that Gemara, there are certain malachas that, albeit grama by nature, but if that's the derech hamalacha, we'll say that's the tsuras hamalacha, that's the way it's done. So it doesn't have the secondary label as grama, it's a ma'aseh biyadayim. The ikka asiyasei b'kach gives it the full brunt of a maleches issa. Therefore, it's quite logical to say that the way to put a light on is not to scratch two stones and create a fire, obviously, that's primitive. It's by putting on a switch. That's the derech hasiyasei. And that's why when you put on a light, certainly an incandescent bulb, which is a malacha deraisa, the issa is not mitigated by the fact that you didn't touch the bulb. The derech ikka hasiyasei is a ma'aseh issa. Just to show you how this expresses itself in a beautiful way, a person that has we'll talk about an old-fashioned refrigerator, because I don't want to get involved with the technology that is forever increasing and it's hard to put a label. But let's talk about a simple refrigerator. The issue is that there's a bulb in the fridge. You open the door and the light goes on. So people that have that, of course, have to work it out before Shabbos not to violate the issa of opening the door and putting on a light. Now, what's the problem? What's the severity of that issa? That would be a malacha of putting on a light. It's a psik reisha. You know, it happens every single time. So opening a refrigerator door and putting on the light is a classic example of a psik reisha on Shabbos that's problematic. Based on this, Rav Moshe ruled in the Igros Moshe, if someone forgot to unscrew the bulb or deactivate the lighting, he can't open the refrigerator on Shabbos. But what does he do? He has no food for Shabbos. Enlist the help of a guy, call a guy, and tell the guy innocently, please open my refrigerator. The light inevitably will go on, psik reisha. So Rav Moshe mentions the Shulchan Aruch in Reish Nun Gimel. Psik reisha for a yid is awesome, but to ask a guy to do something that inevitably will cause a psik reisha, guy and a psik reisha is the right combination, and it's mutter. A good example is if it was raining and you had enough time to close cover the sukkah with the shlach, and now it stopped raining. We'd love to eat in the sukkah, but the problem is the shlach is full of water, and if you lift up the shlach, it's going to fall onto the grass, and you'll be watering the grass. So the eitzah is call the guy, tell him please open the shlach. Invariably the water will fall onto the grass. Psik reisha by a guy is mutter. That's Rav Moshe's premise that he says in Igros Moshe. But what's noteworthy, and that gives us a very, very intense appreciation for the sugya of Shlomo Zalman, both in Mincha Shlomo and Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa, take strong exception. Rav Moshe is mekel because he calls it a psik reisha. Like Rav Shlomo Zalman, it's probably worse than a psik reisha. It's a ma'aseh biyadayim. Because since we identified that the way of putting the light on in a refrigerator is by opening the door, so the opening of the door is the switch. So Rav Shlomo Zalman would not tolerate calling that just a psik reisha, which legitimizes Amir La'akum. Because in reality, this is a ma'aseh biyadayim. So if a yid can't do it, a guy can do a ma'aseh biyadayim. So again, it's noteworthy. Rav Moshe was Rav Moshe, certainly could be saimach on that psak and call the guy to open the refrigerator. But what's penetrating about it is this identification that opening a refrigerator door is not a coincidental result that the light goes on, that is the derech hamalach. That's the derech hasiyosei. So much so, Hashem Zalman would not allow psik reisha by a guy because this is a ma'aseh b'yadayim. I'll tell you another shaila that we had. I just came from a camp with many B'nai Torah, and we discussed a little about opening refrigerators. I'm sure you went through the sugya, but Rav Moshe, again, in a different tshuva, this he quoting Rav Henkin, that without getting into the details, opening a refrigerator when the motor is off is problematic because the hot air rushes in or the cold air rushes out or both, and that will trigger the reaction. Every action is a reaction, don't forget. So by opening the door when the refrigerator motor is off, you're going to cause it either to go on then or go on sooner. And that Rav Moshe felt is a problem. So the minig of B'nai Torah, I think many B'nai Torah, Rav Moshe psak is a psak, even though Rav Moshe evidently was not convinced, but he writes Rav Henkin Paskin, so we'll follow that you only open the refrigerator when the motor is on. Once it's on, you can't go wrong. I told the Bachim, what happens if you take a machmir and your parents need the milk for the coffee in the morning? If I say, get me some milk, but the motor is off. You're going to wait, aggravate your father. So I told him a beautiful psak of Rav Shlomo Zalman, which we'll appreciate. So Zalman has a tshuva about refrigerators. And he says that he believes it's even mutter when the motor is off. Something's going to happen sooner or later, either right away or later. So Zalman, with his analytical mind, says, but that's really a psik reisha b'grama. Think about it. If I open the refrigerator and it happens right away, like a light, that's a psik reisha. You can't be makel. Opening the door, the light goes on as a psik reisha. Opening the door when the motor is off is not a psik reisha that the motor will go on. Unless you have a hypersensitive refrigerator with a thermostat that senses any change, a sub-zero that actually goes on right away. But I'm talking about a no-frills fridge that's thermostatically controlled, and it takes time. So a psik reisha, it's not. The kavanah of the son, now the scenario, opening the door to get his father milk was not to put on the motor. He doesn't care about the motor. The food is staying fresh. Motor later. He's not machavan to put on the refrigerator. Hakeri doesn't want to put on the refrigerator. So therefore, he says, really could be made even when the refrigerator motor is off. Why? It's this combination that we discussed earlier. There's no ma'aseh issa. It's not like a light in the fridge that goes on right away. There's no kavana, and that would be mut. So I told them, we should be machmer, and Moshe was machmer, but if it comes to a situation of kibbutz, do it, rely on Shlomo Zalman, and you'll have the mitzvah of kibbutz. Opening a oven on Shabbos is interesting because, again, it's hard to speak about all the ovens, but if you know the fire is on, so opening shouldn't be a problem. But let's say you know the fire is off. So it's noteworthy, the Shmir Shabbos As is opening ovens, seemingly across the board, Rav Moshe is mekel, and Tana Machlokes. Because someone that knows his oven goes on whenever he opens the door, and there are certain ovens like that are pretty sensitive to any change in temperature, so that would be a psik reisha. But Rav Moshe, if you look at the shaila that was presented by Rav Shimon Aida in his sefer, he says he opened the door many times and the oven didn't go on. So Rav Moshe responded correctly so, well, if it's not a psik reisha, what's the problem? So as far as ovens, you have to just know the metzias. But I would mention that ovens is a bigger shaila for two reasons. First of all, an oven, the problem is you might put on a fire. That's havara deraisa. In a refrigerator, which is basically cold electricity, it's not no heat, there's no heating element. Many places mold that electricity without the heating element is the Rabbana. But more so, the opening of a refrigerator is much less of a situation than opening an oven. Opening a refrigerator, the temperature change is not that drastic. The refrigerator is supposed to maintain a temperature, of course, above freezing, let's say 35, 40, room temperature 70. So it's not such a significant change. But an oven that's set for 350, 400, and room temperature is 70, you're talking about something that's pretty close to psik reisha. So an oven always is a little more challenging than a refrigerator. Rabbi Yashiv was asked about opening a door to any room that is thermostatically controlled, whether it's heating in the winter, air conditioning during the summer. And again, every action is a reaction. So he said, decide that it's not a psikresha, and we would add, it's not a psikresha, it's a psikresha begrama. You don't want to put the steam on when you come home from shul. You don't want to do anything but to come into your house. Rabbi Yashiv added another point I think we would appreciate. He said, even if you have a problem with opening a refrigerator, because the door controls a certain sense, is very closely related to the thermostat that's in this refrigerator. It's like one unit. You open the door of the refrigerator, the thermostat is in the refrigerator, so it's working in sync, it's working together. But opening the door to a house and the thermostat has nothing to do with the door per se. It's not so closely related like a thermostat of a refrigerator or oven. He felt that's too distant, too removed from your action, and that would be mutter based on the fact that it's just too incidental. Rabbi God has been mentioned, Rabbi Yashiv was makel regarding the Levanim, the satellite, because it's too far. There's something probably similar to that. You open the door to your house that has no shaykhs to the thermostat, that even though it's in the same room, but it's not connected so much to the opening of the door. We had an interesting question, and whenever in yeshiva, there's always boys that are hot, and always boys that are cold. And this is the problem, winter and summer. So a boy, we call him a shvitzer, and he's schmaltzing. It's during the winter, but he's schmaltzing. He opens the window. No, someone else goes and closes it. The boy does, and he opens it again. So the boy that's cold decides, listen, he's not being very thoughtful. Let me come from a cheshbon. He tells the shvitzer, you're not going to open the window in the winter, because you open the window. In the winter, you're putting on the steam. And steam, presumably, is the malacha d'oraisa. So if he doesn't care about people, he cares about the Torah, we'll scare him off with a fruma cheshbon. So the truth is, the boy should be thoughtful of others and not open the window, even though he's a shvitzer. But in reality, opening a window when a person's hot, even though there's a steam in the room and that's thermostatically controlled, you can't say it's awesome. Because let's look at our checklist. Is this a psikresha? No, it's not. Is it a grama? Which is the one word that defines grama is kavana? Quite to the contrary. The shvitza is hot. The last thing he wants to do is put on more steam. He can't tolerate the previous amount of steam. So to open a window when it's hot in the room during the winter, although there is a reaction later, that would be a psikresha, begrama, and that would be mutter. I would mention in what seems to be a similar scenario, but it's radically different. Let's say a person set the steam, he forgot to raise the temperature to the steam, before Shabbos. I remember Rabbi Pam once told me, remember, before Shabbos, raise the temperature of the steam, make sure there's enough steam during the winter. One of the many things she told me, and I still remember that. That's a good idea because you want to be comfortable. The problem is the person forgot to raise the temperature of the thermostat, and it's cold in the house. And he has a sick child or an elderly parent. The kitzah, he has a problem that it's not adequate steam. But he can't call a guy in the middle of the night because it's the middle of the night. So the truth is, in that case, he could rely on the fact that open the window, with your kavana would be to put on the steam eventually, to raise the steam. Why is that mutter? Because even though it's a grama, again, you're opening the window with the sole intention of raising the steam. But grama, from makam tzarich, is mutter. And in this case, it probably is mutter to call a guy, because you're talking about either children or older people. Hakol choylem eitzel kar, there's a question of being exposed to the cold, which could be detrimental to the health. So if you can't get a guy, it'd be mutter, because this is indeed a mitigated issa. This is the issa of grama, which is not a ma'aseh b'yadayim. We had this question in camp, where often it's sometimes gets cold, or cool, I should say, Shabbos afternoon, and the air conditioner is still working, and it's ridiculous. It's cold outside, it's cold inside. So the Baruch Hu, can they open the windows? This will let the cold air from outside in, but at least the air conditioner won't go on because the air conditioner is unbearable. So there's a kavana, but you're not doing anything directly. This is what we call, I'm sure you discussed this, a meisa meineya. You're preventing something from happening. The air conditioner currently is off. But if the windows stay closed long enough, it will sense a certain amount of heat and will go on. By opening the windows, you're not closing anything. You are preventing it. You're stopping it from happening. You know what that's analogous to? And this is the Machaber Shulchan Aruch, incidentally. Reish Ayin Zayin Sif Aleph, there's a strong wind coming that threatens to blow out your candle. You don't want your candle blown out, so you quickly slam the window and you save the candle. Although you caused the candle to continue burning because the window was closed, that's nothing wrong. You stopped a stopper. The stopper would be the cold air that would blow out the candle, and you stopped the stopper. That's not a malach melachazissa, that's nothing. So here also, basically, it's the accumulation of warm air in the base medrash that will put on the air conditioner. By opening the windows, you're releasing that. But basically, you're stopping the stopper. That's like you have a mischievous child or grandchild that loves to close the lights on Friday night in the dining room. And he's heading to do his mischief once again, and you grab him the last second and you stop him from closing the light. And you proudly proclaim, you see, because of me, we have lights on in the dining room, because if not for me, he would have closed the light. And someone says, hey, maybe you did something wrong. Because you have lights on, is that a groma? The answer is not a groma. You stop the stopper. The same is true regarding, in this scenario, keeping a status quo. You're stopping a stopper, and that would be okay. I saw in Shem Rabbi Yashiv also that if people have portable heaters, of course, this has to be done in a safe way. To keep a portable heater on Shabbos or Yom Tov the whole day and night, you have to make sure it's safe. But he was asked about a portable heater that's being kept in the sukkah, small sukkah, and it must be, especially in America, some years sukkah is much later in the season, it could be quite cold. So can you open the sukkah door if the portable heater is right there? So he mentioned that you got to be careful, because if the portable heater is off, a sudden gush of cold air by opening the door might qualify to be a psik reisha. So even if you're not machabim for that, but if it indeed, if in the situation, it would be identified as a psik reisha, that would be a problem. Again, it's a portable heater is more sensitive than a regular refrigerator. But the point is, once you know the metzias, then hopefully the rest flows naturally. Someone asked the question, it's very cold in the room, it's during the summer, too much air conditioning, can he put a towel over the air conditioner vent that will put it off earlier? Now, of course, this is simple to explain. If it's going, and the thermostat senses that it's still not the desired temperature, it will continue going. Once you drape a towel over the air conditioner vent, so the air goes right back, and the thermostat senses a cold feeling. So it will shut off earlier. That sounds innocent, but there you have a major kavana. You're putting this towel onto the AC vent with the deliberate intention of closing the air conditioner that much sooner. This is a clear-cut grumma. Now, again, putting a towel onto an air conditioner is by no means a ma'isa issa. It's not a psik reisha, both in nature and in result. It doesn't happen right away. But this is clearly a grumma. You are using an ingenious way of closing the air conditioner. Although there is a delayed reaction, that's identifiable as a grumma. Grumma on Shabbos and Asami D'Rabbanan. So doing this would be a grumma on Shabbos at Asami D'Rabbanan. Of course, if you have, again, this is a scenario, we have older people or children that are sensitive to the cold, it might be detrimental to their health. So then you could either call a guy to close it. If no guy is available, you could use the same approach that we mentioned earlier. Put the towel over the air conditioner, although it's a grama, but grama b'makom tzayrach, certainly for chaylim or preventing chaylim, would be a viable option. Someone asked me, the smoke alarm was ringing, disturbing. What could he do? I told him the first thing you have to do, check if there's a fire. People start running to put it out. Check, it might be indicative of a problem. But he knows it's not a fire. The candle he actually uses wicks and oil, and the wick burnt and created a lot of smoke. The kitzah, the smoke alarm is ringing. What option does he have? Now, typically what we do during the week, when there's a smoke alarm ringing and there's no fire, You try to take a towel or something and start fanning the area right next to the smoke alarm, and that seems to stop the smoking, stop the ringing that much sooner. The question is that mutter on Shabbos? So this, again, brings us to a beautiful point. Let's try to figure this out. What is the science of this? How do you understand this? It's not magic, obviously. The smoke alarm is disturbing. It's ringing incessantly. By somehow fanning the smoke alarm, it stops ringing. How does that work? Obviously, it's not magic. So I'll tell you one of two possibilities. Either the presence of smoke is causing it to ring, and there's more smoke entering the smoke alarm, and that's continuing its ringing. If that's the case, then there's a good reason to think it's mutter to fan the rest of the smoke, because you're not closing the smoke alarm. More smoke, the induction of more smoke, causes it to ring longer. By me fanning that smoke away, I am being mesa meineya. I'm taking away smoke that would keep it ringing, but I'm not closing it. It's just there's nothing to keep it going. That would be, the analogy would be if there's a candle burning, an oil candle burning, and it's about to go out, and there's oil rolling down the hill, about to go into that receptacle that will keep the candle, the fire burning for another hour, and I stop the oil, I don't let it go in, and it goes out. That sounds terrible, but there's nothing wrong with it. I didn't do anything. It could have burnt long, and I stopped it. So here also, the smoke, the presence of smoke could have maintained its ringing longer and longer. I took away the smoke. And the truth is, if you have a smoke alarm that works that way, it shouldn't be a problem. But more often than not, and again, this is what I was told by someone that knows the Metzias, that's not the reality in contemporary smoke alarms. I used to make them that way, but today it works differently. There's a radioactive element that is able, if it's able to iodize the air, it keeps the smoke alarm off. Now, you don't have to understand how it works, but it's basically the presence of clean air that keeps the smoke alarm off. Once there's a smoke in the area, it's unable to iodize the air, and that's causes the ringing. So it's not the lack of smoke that closes it, it's the induction of clean air, or the presence of clean air that keeps this, that stops the ringing from continuing. In fact, he told me that's why by a construction site, you can't use smoke alarms, because there's not smoke, but the dust and everything does not allow the air to be iodized. It's not clean. So if indeed the way your smoke alarm is that it's the presence of clean air that keeps it off, so now we have to rethink our original approach. So by me fanning the smoke alarm, I am putting in clean air into the smoke alarm. It's the cleaner that's putting it off. It's not I'm preventing it from ringing because I'm taking away smoke. I am actually putting it off. That would be either a ma'aseh b'yadayim or minimally a grama. So you have to know what the smoke alarm is and how to apply it. And now we come to, I guess we could say, Achra and Chav of 3 different questions, but are all very much based on what we learned. And I guess primarily the question of a motion detector. To put it very simply, this is a classic tzaddik ma'pa'al. A person who's fadvekit in Shabbos is walking home from shul, minding his own business, and all of a sudden a light goes on. And again, you hear the word light, you're a little more frightened because lights, if it has the right mechanics, could be a malacha deraisa. So I'm walking home from shul, I'm walking in the street, I'm doing nothing wrong, I'm even thinking of learning, and a light goes on. You know, it happened by itself. The question is, can you walk in a place that you know the light will go on, but you have no kavana, the street lights are doing a good job, you don't need the light, you're not interested in the light. So you have to understand that this is not a question of kishuf. It's not like because you're such a charming person, somehow you and the light connect and it goes on. It's very simple. There is a switch. Now, it's not a classic typical switch. It's the motion detector switch. Either you break the current or complete the current. I'm not going to even get into the details. That's not important. But whatever the case is, by your presence, you are putting on the light. That seems to be similar to the Russia's premise that if that's the derech hasiyasei bekach, so that's attributable to you. It's not that it happened, you did it. Now, in the typical motion detector, there is no manual switch. You and me, we are the switches. So you can't say I'm doing nothing wrong, I don't know what happened, there's something, this is your action. And that's why many places can feel that walking in a place that you know that you will put on a light or anything else that goes with the motion detection should be a problem. The Shevet HaLevi, as Rav Gaddis mentioned earlier, feels it's mutter, and his main the thrust of his tshuva is the aleph. And this again, this brings you and I back to Soif Masid Machshava Tchila. The aleph of Meleches Shabbos is Meleches Machshavas. I'm sure you learned that in the beginning of this wonderful sugya. But the aleph, the starting point is Meleches Machshavas. Here, there's no malacha. There's no malacha that we can identify. Adam Hoylach Kedarka, his lashon is Lefi Tumai ve'ene moisev af tnua achas. That's a Ma'aseh Heta Muvhak. That is a certified Ma'aseh Heta walking in the street, and you cannot create a malacha from a non-malacha. And as proof, he cites our Rashba that we began with. Where the Rashba says you're allowed to close the door to your house, even though the deer is inside, and inevitably the deer will be trapped. So he understood the Rashba to mean that this is a Ma'aseh Heta Muvhak that has no impact on what you did, on the outcome. So Rav Vosna feels that a motion detector is too far removed from your action, and therefore you cannot be held accountable. And again, he's based it on the Rashba. However, from the other poskim that do not accept this, we can understand why. I'm of course, I'm just going to explain the two sides. Because this is not Adam Hoylach Kedarkoi as innocent as it seems. Now, you might be innocent, but you are the switch. It's not a Ma'aseh Heta Muvhak, it's a Ma'aseh switching on a motion detector light. That's the only way to do it. And just as an analogy, I don't think this is a perfect analogy, but the Shulchan Aruch and Shin Lamed Vav Siv Gimel writes that a person should not, that's what Mr. Burr explains, a person should not walk in a place where there's high grass and he's walking barefoot, because then it's a psik reisha that he's tearing out grass. Now there also he's not walking to tear out grass, he's walking to shul to daven mincha. But he can't live in denial. You can't be oblivious of the fact that a psik reisha is an accountability. So there also is hoylach kedarka. So someone said, yeah, but there you're doing a ma'aseh tlisha. But here also you're doing a ma'aseh putting on the light. So the fact that it's innocently walking, well, you have to, retrace your steps and see, what am I doing? The raya from the Rashba that he brings, the chayr is not a raya. Because as we explained, that's a psik reisha big rama. Here, in the Rashba's case, it's not a ma'aseh b'yadayim. It's a grama, as we explained, trapping a deer in a room. If you don't grab it, is a grama. But here it's a ma'aseh b'yadayim, it goes on right away. Now, where we could say is if someone accidentally walked into the zone and did trigger the light, so people say, now what should I do now? Should I stay the entire Shabbos? The answer is no. No, you don't have to. But I'll explain you why. Because it doesn't work that when you walk off, you hit the switch that puts it off. Typically, when you put something on, it has a certain amount of time that it's programmed to stay on. If it senses your presence longer, it will stay on longer. So the truth is, if anything, quite to the contrary. Staying longer is continuing its operation, causing the continuous operation. Walking out will just let things go on its own. It will go off on its own, the way it's programmed. So basically, by walking out, you might be a certain Mesa Maineya, which I also known as me. I'm the Maineya, I'm keeping it on. Walking out, I'm just gonna leave it as it is. It goes off at a certain time. And therefore, walking out is okay. Now, a surveillance camera is a much broader question because there are many institutions, many Mekayim Satira that need surveillance. Ironically enough, I was a part of a yeshiva and they insisted on having motion detectors. Then they decided surveillance cameras. Then they wanted to close it on Shabbos until they had, and they did close it on Shabbos, until they had during the week a Geneva. And the Menal showed me, because the camera was on, they videoed a person stealing. They saw exactly identity. They're able to apprehend the perpetrator. And the funniest thing is they have a video of him tearing down a different motion detector because they're pretty expensive. So he stole one, got caught on the other one, and he got caught eventually. So it's easy for me to say, no, Moisés should have a surveillance camera. You don't need it. People need it. You have to be understanding. But the truth is, walking in an area where the surveillance camera is already on, so you're not really activating any new malacha. If it's going anyhow, then the fact that it's now videoing me instead of the pavement, whatever it was focused on, is very little of a problem. Now, a drop more current maybe, but these Shlomo Zalman says the increase in current is something that's hard to identify halachically. So basically, the typical surveillance cameras that are going anyhow, and the question is by you being in its area, it is recording you instead of something else, that seems to be negligible in halacha. What's more of a shaila is when it's off and when it senses any motion, it starts to record. So that would be like a typical motion detector. Your presence, your walking, again, how it works is irrelevant, but your movement triggers this surveillance camera to go on from off to on. That's much more of a significant accomplishment. You're putting on the surveillance camera. And that's why those type of things are much more of a shaila. Again, there are those that are makel for different reasons. I don't want, this is not the forum for that. But the basic difference is that a person has to know when you're walking into something and you're putting it on, that might be your action. And last but not least, something, I guess, which is more basic, but it is in a certain sense a contemporary issue, is the question that we have in different forms. I'll give you two forms. A person, sometimes it happens with a child, sometimes even with an adult, either absent-mindedly, puts on the hot water. Now the hot water is running, and of course it's Shabbos. So whatever was done, okay? He was absent-minded, the shaygig, whatever it is, and he closed the water. Or there's a drip. Someone closed the water, but it's still dripping, and it's getting the person nervous. He wants to close the hot water drip. What could be the problem? I'm not putting on the hot water, I'm closing the hot water. What could be the problem? The Shmir Shabbos in Aleph Mem Beis has the following understanding. When water is running, you'll notice you put on hot water or a few people are showering in the house at the same time, suddenly the water is no longer as hot as you want it to be. Why is that? Very simple. Because the more that you deplete the contents of hot water in the tank and the cold water replaces that, so now the tank has more cold water, less hot water, and it's unable to cook it quick enough. It just can't do that much. A few showers maybe, but one after the other, when the water is running, it's unable to cook it quick enough to provide hot water after multiple uses. When the water is running and on Shabbos, so if you would freeze and zero it in onto your water tank in the basement, the water in the tank will never get fully cooked because it's running. That's where you're going to end up getting water the whole Shabbos running that's lukewarm or close to lukewarm, but it won't be burning hot. By closing the hot water, ironically enough, you are being mamar bishulai in the tank. And let's refocus, go back to the basement. The water in the tank right now will not get cooked. By closing the hot water, so now you're confining the water in the tank, and that water will get cooked. So he felt that would be a situation of a maher bishulai. After all, it will get cooked quicker. Otherwise, this water might never get cooked because it's going to run out and give you that lukewarm or lukewarm plus water. So he says closing a hot water that's gushing is a contemporary example of a maher bishulai. Now, however, what I think we could say a possible svar to be makel is that this is another example of psik reisha bigram. Again, when you close the hot water, there's no ma'aseh issa. It's not being cooked instantly. It's not magic. What then? The fact that you contain or confine the water in the tank and stop, so then after a while, it will cook. That's nothing more than a grama. your kavan is not to cook the water in the tank because you don't use hot water on Shabbos. Like the rest of Shomer Shabbos don't use hot water on Shabbos. So why don't we reduce this to a psik reisha b'grama? There's no ma'ase issa because nothing happens instantaneously when you close the water. And the fact that it's mamar b'shule is just a later reaction. But your kavan is not for that. Therefore, the chayrik can be makel. But I think what is more pashut, if it's just a insignificant dropping, so that doesn't change the total picture so much if you stop that dripping, because the water basically is just a drip or two. Or if someone accidentally put on the water and you close it right away, that could be even the Shmir Shabbos would be makel, because again, it didn't change so much the temperature. And thank you all for listening and have a wonderful summer.